Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Iowa Learning Farms virtual field day today, where we're going to be exploring redefining the field edge. Thank you to everyone who's been attending our previous field days and providing your feedback. We really do appreciate that. We hope that we have followed through on a lot of your requests here, and being in the field to do these pre-recorded videos does allow our speakers to engage and interact and think of things that maybe they wouldn't when looking at static photos or video taken elsewhere. So I'd like to welcome you all. I'm Liz Ripley. I'm a conservation and cover crop outreach specialist with the Iowa Learning Farms. We were established in 2004. Our goal is to build a culture of conservation by working with farmers and researchers to implement practices that improve water quality and soil health while remaining profitable. And this is all made possible thanks to funding from our partners, including the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, Iowa State University Extension and Outreach, the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture, Iowa Department of Natural Resources, the US EPA Section 319, Conservation Districts of Iowa, Iowa Farm Bureau, Practical Farmers of Iowa, GrowMark, Iowa Agriculture Water Alliance, Iowa Corn, and the Iowa Nutrient Research Center. So just a bit of housekeeping here. I do encourage you to stay muted and your video off during the video portion of today's presentation. Once the video is done playing, we'll have just a brief discussion and then we'll open it up for questions. And you can ask those questions in two ways. You can either unmute yourself to ask the questions of our speakers, or you can submit them via the chat box. Following today's event, you'll be receiving an email from us asking you to evaluate the field day. And again, we really do appreciate all of that feedback, because this is just the start of the conversation. It's the exchanging of ideas. It's also then important to network this information with those that couldn't be here. The benefit of being virtual is that this will be recorded and available on our YouTube channel following today's event. And we ask that you return that evaluation. If you do, we'll send you, and you would like, we'll send you a free Iowa Learning Farms neck gaiter that can be used as a mask. So today we have two great speakers for you. We have Dennis Staudt. He's a Floyd County farmer who's participating in this project, and Mark Licht, Iowa State University assistant professor and extension cropping systems specialist, who's leading our project. So without further ado here, I'm going to mute myself, advance the slide, and start the video. Sorry about that. I was told there's no sound. Let's try this again.
Hello, I'm Mark Licht. I'm an assistant professor and extension cropping systems specialist with Iowa State University. Today we're at the Staudt farm, and we'll be talking with Dennis Staudt about the Redefining the Field Edge project that we have going with Dennis and several other farmers that's been funded through the USDA SARE program. So let's pan over and talk to Dennis here a little bit. Dennis, do you want to tell us a little bit about your farming operation?
Yeah, thanks Mark, and welcome here to the farm. Our farm's a century farm here in Floyd County, Iowa. My wife and I began the farm here in 1981, but we would be the third generation here in Floyd County. We've been primarily corn and soybeans, ridge till. We've been ridge tilling for about 30 of those years now. We're past pork producers. We're retired from that right now, but we're still active on the corn and soybean side.
So Dennis, let's jump into the project a little bit. So the idea behind the project was we were doing some subfield analysis to identify lower areas or wetter areas of the field that were less productivity and had lower profitability. So what interested you in this project when we first started it?
When I first heard from you folks, Mark, I said, I have a 1 acre that is a natural for this because when we go to the site, we'll see that this field borders a drainage ditch. We have a drainage district that emerges to the surface, and then the water passes through this ditch. And over the recent years, we've had these increased rainfall events, and that water, sometimes even 2 or 3 times a year, will overflow the drainage ditch and enter into this portion of the field. 2 of the years, 16 and 18, those were the last 2 years I had soybeans, there was nothing in that 1 acre other than black soybeans, which they told us not to harvest. And then, so most every year there's some reduction. So I said that little rectangle is a candidate for this.
You know, before we run out to the field, I can't help but notice the landscaping around here. It's really beautiful. Do you want to take a second and talk about that a little bit?
Well, thanks, Mark. Yes, credit for that goes strictly to my wife, Patty, who is an Iowa master gardener. And it shows, because this is one of her favorite times of year, is tending to the flowers, and she loves to grow flowers, landscaping, and the vegetable garden. So, hey, let's take a look.
Sounds good. Okay, right now we're out at the field site. This is about a 1 acre site that is running east and west here along that drainage ditch. Dennis, can you talk to us a little bit about how you are farming around this area?
Yeah, Mark, it turned out that when we came to 1 acre, we just have an 80-foot width, which is my 32-row headland, by 500 and whatever many feet it is to make an acre. So it was not that inconvenient. I have headlands on both sides of this, but this is just a substitute for that headland. And so it's just a rectangle, and it's really not much of an inconvenience at all to farm around. Back there, you'll see we have a pretty uniform stand of oats and some foxtail. We're looking for some little perennials to be coming up, but we're a little short on those right now. Back there ways, the plot was already underwater twice this year after it was seeded for about 2 or 3 days each. But the oats and foxtail came through nicely, and that's about where we stand right now, Mark.
And so, yeah, one of the things we know with these seedings is that the CP mixes and the native mixes generally do take a little bit of time to get established, and so that's why you seeded it with the oats, I presume, and that's why we see a lot of the foxtail that's coming through too. And then as far as your mid-season management here, how many times did you mow it again?
I mowed it twice. When the oats were heading out, I would cut it at approximately an 8-inch height, and then I did it the second time. Probably 10 days ago was the second cutting. And so, yeah, a concern that makes me wonder is when we initially seeded this thing, are those little perennial seeds, did we get those too deep? I see from our other planting that 1/4-inch seeding looks really good. So maybe we need to work on that a little bit.
Yeah, and a good benefit from that mowing is it does keep the water hemp and the other weed species down a little bit, but yet still stabilizes the soil, so hopefully those native species can come through.
Yeah, we're glad to be patient and keep clipping this if we need to allow some more time for those perennials.
So as we look at this, and this is an area that I would say is environmentally a sensitive area. Is that one of the reasons why you were interested in this project in addition to the loss of profit?
Yeah, I've got to be honest with you. The one thing that really attracted me was the bottom line on a project like this. We were just talking on the way out here. 40-acre field, let's just use a number, 200 bushel corn, 8,000 bushel. Most of the years I would only get half a crop, sometimes no crop off of this, but yet I put all those inputs on it. So why not make that a 39-acre field, same 8,000 bushels, now we're at 205 without spending a nickel more. We're spending less, I should say, because we deleted those inputs on that. So I think it's if you have a project area like that, I think there's some real benefits that can be gained.
It makes it easy justification for a seeding mix like this that is around $100 to $150 an acre in seed costs then.
Right. that's about the only input that's needed, plus a little bit of labor to get this established.
What long-term benefits do you see in a project like this and having these areas?
Well, the climate is changing, and again, I've been here for 30-some years, and never remember in the early years that we took on water in this area, but we sure are now. It doesn't take a real huge rain event. It's a nice large drainage district upstream from here, and it exits just about 100 yards away. It dumps out on the surface out of a 36-inch main. So that water just has to go somewhere, and I feel that this acre in the future might be just a little more in the path than it used to be. So we might as well keep the soil tight and keep some cover on there. And well, like I say, the water's been on here twice this year and with no adverse effects.
Is the in the neighborhood and in that drainage district, have you seen an increase in the amount of tile intensity that's being used, or has it remained relatively the same as well?
This is, I'd say, a fairly old drainage district, but it's pretty extensive. I can't name the acres, but the main goes 1, 2, maybe up to 3 miles north of here. So I can imagine that there's a good block of acres that gets drained through that. Here we are, Mark, at a different pollinator plot that my wife and I established only 14 months ago. This is an area that surrounded a machine shed that we felt it was impractical to farm this small. This is also about 1 acre. And so we established a CP23, I believe, and had a gentleman come to no-till this into nice, bare, firm seed bed with no other seeds, just the CP23, and it took off like gangbusters. And here we are a year and 2 months later, and we've got all this. A month or two ago, it was cone flowers all over the place, and now there are these, whatever they are. So the lots of species, and it really got off to a good start, which sort of tells me this no-till drilling is a really good way to get these things established.
And what motivated you to establish, a pollinator mix like this in this area?
We said, here's our new machine shed, and here's an acre around it that's not suitable for farming. Do we really want to mow another acre? And so there was that, and the overall feeling that we need to do things to help this environment, and we figured, well, this could be beneficial in a number of ways.
So what have you noticed differently after you've established this as far as birds and other wildlife as well as the pollinators?
I don't see too many birds, but when we're around here, you see butterflies all over the place and rabbits all over the place. They must love it down in there. So and bees. Bees are plentiful out here as well, Mark.
So with all the extra pollinators, have you noticed better pollination with your vegetable gardens?
I can't say that we could measure it, but after the fact of planning this, I got to feel that this can only be beneficial in the plants that my wife has, apple trees and gardens. It's got to help those as well.
So Dennis, you've been farming for a number of years, right? And you've always been involved in conservation. Can you describe some of the conservation practices that you have been using?
Sure, Mark. We're learning about cover crops like everyone. It's kind of a slow process, but I'm getting to be a big believer in their long-term effects. We have to, as farmers, we have to understand what's my immediate payback? Not immediate. We have to be patient with this as well and let things develop and maybe adopt the practice for a number of years. And then we'll see some great improvements, I feel, in soil quality, soil tilth. Behind here, we have a buffer strip with a waterway extending back upstream there. There's a little story behind this one. This is rented land, and I approached the owners and I said, this area could use some conservation work. And I showed them the design that we had talked about, and they said, are you really sure it needs that? Do you really want to do that? And I said, well, I really think in the long term it'll be beneficial. 2 years later, it was pretty well established, and we had a gully washer. And I stood right here, and I was able to take a picture of blue this entire buffer strip was full of water, and the waterway, about as far as you can see, was all blue. And I sent that to them, and they said, okay, we get it now. So that was nice to see, and they're a believer in that as well. I've done a number of these. I feel like every acre I farm, I would like it either to be a good producing acre or a conservation acre. This marginal land maybe needs to be just given a break.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the cover crop projects you've been involved with the Iowa Learning Farms?
The Iowa Learning Farms has been a good catalyst for these with their programs. I can't name them all. There's been some numerous commonly cereal rye on corn, and also do some oats on the standing soybeans. I prefer the oats on soybeans going to corn. Yeah, I can't name them all, but I will say that Iowa Learning Farms and other agencies have really been instrumental in encouraging people financially, in giving them a little boost to make them want to do these practices.
Are there any additional practices that you're starting to consider, or you're thinking about learning more about?
Well, I've read about the prairie strips. I don't know a lot about them, but hey, you never know. I'm going to try to learn some more, and we'll see what the future holds on that.
As we wrap up this virtual field day portion of the filming, in full disclosure, I should mention that Dennis's daughter, Ann, who is actually behind one of the cameras right now, is on the Iowa Learning Farm staff. Dennis, thank you so much for hosting us today. This was a great opportunity to see some of these practices in motion.
And thank you, Mark. It was nice to have you come here and see firsthand what we're doing. And I appreciate all the support that you people show as an interest in conservation, and we'll try to do what we can on our end.
All right. So again, you can unmute yourself to ask questions of Mark or Dennis or both, or you can submit them via the chat box. I did hear, and I was counting on this, Adam Janke let us know that that yellow, whatever that is, flower is called evening primrose. So, all right. So a little bit of kind of background on this project. Mark, can you describe a little bit more of how this project is set up and how you're demonstrating this on multiple sites, including Dennis's?
Yeah, so as we got started on this project, we were actually looking for 5 farmers to work with. We ended up with 4. And really what we did is we went out and we basically did a interview on the production practices that each of the farms was using, or the fields that we were considering with them. And then we took that and then came back and did that subfield profitability analysis. And largely that was done using yield monitor data. But in a couple of them, we had some additional spatial data that we could use. And so with that, we ended up with 4 of these locations. So Dennis has one, another one over by Clarion, the third one over by Manson, Iowa, and then the 4th one down by McCallsburg. And each of them has, I'll say, some unique characteristics with it. As you've seen with Dennis's, that was, next to a drainage ditch and water that would come out of its banks. The one by Clarion also actually has a stream that meanders by. And so water not only comes up out of the banks, but then it's at the bottom of a hilly area. And so you do get some runoff into it and some erosion as far as resource concerns. And then the other 2 are what I would term as true prairie potholes, where we get rainfall, they fill up, and can take weeks to decrease in the water level. So that's kind of a quick summary of how this got started and how we ended up selecting these 4 areas.
So there was a question here, where can we get a list of the best perennials to use? So I'm gonna direct that one to you again, Mark.
Yeah, so as we were working on this project and getting it started, we were basically using the conservation practices that are recommended through the NRCS. And so all four of our sites are using a CP23 mix that's designed for wetter areas. And, you know, the information as far as what's in those mixes, you know, you can find those, well, in a couple different places. We ended up ordering our seed out of from a local supplier here in Iowa, and that's the seeding mix that I've been kind of referencing. But I also know that the NRCS offices have access to what's in those mixes.
All right, this one's for you, Dennis. So you mentioned mowing that area a couple times, and it's soybeans this year. I guess, could you let us know, in corn years, will you be able to easily access that area for mowing maintenance? Or what's your plan for that?
I will, it is kind of a remote area, but I can take out a few rows for about under 1,000 feet of length. And so I think for this project, I'm just going to keep that access open for that, because I think we, especially at this early stage, we've got to keep the possibility of that mowing going. So we'll just do what we need to keep access to that.
So the question again about the sites that are participating in the study, so I'm going to hand this one off to Mark. What's the tile drainage settings or setup for each of the sites? Are they tile drained?
So the Dennis's and the one up by Clarion do not have the inlet tile drains to those. I'm just thinking of the one over by Manson. There's not a tile inlet, and over by McCallsburg, I believe that one does have one right on the edge of it. Yep. So
you mentioned in the video, Mark, that the seed can cost, you know, upwards of $100. What cost share programs, I know you mentioned a couple acronyms, if you could let us know what those are available through the various agencies like USDA, NRCS for these kinds of projects?
Yeah, so the NRCS does have the Conservation Reserve Program, where they can provide some funding if the area is large enough. And so that'd be one place to start. There are also some private groups that provide some funding as well that can be utilized, like Pheasants Forever. And then I'm looking at Adam Jenke's picture, trying to remember the program that the DNR wildlife biologist was talking to us about. That, you know, so there are a variety of different funding options that you have to find, and maybe if Adam will throw that into the chat box, we can mention that one as well. But I'm failing to remember it right now.
It's the Prairies Partners Program. Yep, he got there. It's through their private lands program with the Iowa DNR. So you mentioned that they're of a certain size, but what if someone wants to go just do it themselves? Where can they go purchase seed or possibly get the technical, you know, advice without maybe going through the cost share process?
Yeah, so we've been really tapping into the Iowa Department of Natural Resources biologists, wildlife biologists there. They're pretty knowledgeable on these. They have a lot of experience, I'll say, with them. So that's a good group to tap into. Pheasants Forever also is another group that has biologists on staff that are experienced with these seed mixes and using some of these practices. As far as, you know, where to purchase the seed from, like I mentioned, we used Allendale seed here in, well, I guess it'd be the southern Iowa or just on the edge of central Iowa. down by Winterset. So, you know, that's just one of the options. There are other options as far as buying the seed as well.
So, Dennis, I know we chatted at the start of this project because I'm involved with it myself. Can you talk a little bit about how you've approached the technology side of your farm and how that helped you identify this area?
Well, we, I suppose regarding this area, yield monitor data would be the primary chunk of data that was used, though it's extreme enough that the eyeball test would serve as well. It's just that happens to be just that portion of a field. So, well, I think everyone with the yield monitor can go along and say, I am cooking, I am at 220 bushel, and it's staying right there. And then you run into one of these areas and you say, what is happening? And that is a average buster when you go into areas like this. So it really points out that, you know, it's the whole field, and maybe if this area maybe doesn't want to be in part of that field, you know. So that's, I guess, the primary thing.
Forgot I was muted, sorry. You mentioned it was seeded with a no-till drill. Can you talk a little bit about the timeline from when you decided on your mixture till it was seeded, and when you did that?
Yes. We were going to seed it last fall after the harvest, but things went a little backwards there. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, all four of the projects encountered the same fate last fall. The conditions just didn't permit. So we started this spring with just a mat of corn stalks there. And so I had to get some soil showing. So I went in with a one-pass tool to get things mixed up a little bit. Then, actually, Liz, we broadcast seeded this with oats. I believe a bushel or bushel and a half of oats in with it. And then just lightly drug it to incorporate. Not looking back, probably not the number one choice. If this all happened again, I would try to choose the year where it followed the soybeans. And then I would just go ahead and no-till drill into that soybean stubble. And I think we would be able to control the depth a little better. That's what I'm worried a little. I think a 1/4 inch for those perennials in worked ground, it's pretty tough to achieve that. Things just get deep. Hopefully they'll still come. But yeah, to sum up, I would favor no-till. That other plot that was in our yard was no-till drilled, and that's the one that really took off quickly.
So for maintenance, you mentioned mowing. Are you concerned about these strips becoming places for water hemp or other problem weeds? And what is kind of your plan to address that, prevent that?
No, I've got a number of other, say, buffer strips or waterways that I thought were going to be a jungle, but if you can just keep ahead of it, you can get on top of those ragweeds and other problem weeds just by mowing, and then you allow the other stuff to come through as it's able.
And there's the potential for spot spraying, you know, if you get a thistle infection or infestation, right, the word there, to treat those areas instead of broadcast spraying any kind of chemical. Mark, did you want to add something to that?
No, well, yeah, I was just going to chime in that because some of these species do take a little bit longer to establish, what you notice is that they're very competitive, but the number of different grasses or forbs that are showing up in there will change from year 1 to year 2 to year 3 until it really becomes fully established, and then they tend to outcompete the other weed species that we really don't want to be seeing.
So Mark, obviously profitability was a big driving factor for Dennis. In terms of the other partners, what were some of their motivations for participating in the project?
Yeah, so the other motivations, I think it looked really attractive when you can identify an area that is not very profitable, right? So I think they all would maybe tell you that, but then the other partners also, so like I mentioned, the one up by Clarion, where he had some erosion that was forming down into it, and so he looked at it from the standpoint of he could maybe stop that erosion from moving through his field in a way, just like a buffer strip there. And then I think the other part of this is, I'll call it the hassle factor of farming through some of these potholes. If they drowned out and you end up trying to go back in and replant them, not only do you have the additional cost of replanting that, but you also are now dealing with, having to get in there, dealing with different weed species at different times because of the differences in canopy. And then, potentially even in the fall of the year where you might be looking at some wetter grain in these areas that did get replanted and matured a little bit later. So I think, several of them were looking at it and thinking, if we can farm around those wet areas, obviously we don't have the costs of production going into it, but we don't necessarily have all that hassle with various things throughout the year as well.
I'm going to direct this one to Mark, but Dennis, feel free to hop in. If you want to minimize drift from a neighboring field, any specific plantings that you'd recommend for this kind of area?
You said minimizing drift, herbicide drift, I presume?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, with that, so you're still likely going to have some drift if you use, a CP 23 mix like we did. That herbicide drift is still going to be occurring type thing, and so some of these species are quite tolerant, or most of them are quite tolerant. Some of them would be less tolerant, but then that does provide the what I would call separation distance from the target field to the to your corn or soybeans, and so that can minimize the impact possibly on your corn and soybean fields as well.
Dennis, do you have any concerns with drift or anything with these areas?
Well, just the normal concerns. I mean, the people around me seem to be quite responsible and sensible. I feel that this has some susceptibility, just like the row crops. So I trust that that all of us will do our best job at spraying our fields and trying to observe the wind and things like that.
So you mentioned that this was a SARE project, Mark. What are some of the other components that you're looking at within this project?
So within this project, another faculty that's helping, Adam Jenke, he's been doing some monarch and other insect and bird species surveys into depressional areas that were planted into warm season or other mixes 5, 10, 15 years ago. So the idea behind that part of it is kind of getting an idea for, what does that wildlife diversity look like in these areas that are much more established. Next year, we will be going back in and looking at what are the plant species or the makeup of plants within these areas to get an idea of, what species are out there or have survived through the years, again, 5 to 20 years later, trying to get back to most of these conservation practice mixes with the grasses and forbs have 25 to 30, 35 different species in them. And if in the long run, we're only finding a dozen or 2 dozen species in there, maybe that'll help us and allow us to fine tune those mixes a little bit to better target these wetter, more depressional areas.
And I guess, is there any measurement changes for the soil itself?
Oh yeah, great point. So we are taking soil nitrate samples in these 4 that we established this year or this spring, and then we're kind of pairing it or using a paired approach in collecting nitrate samples from within that field in similar soil types that are elsewhere in the field. So we do have that. Coincidentally, in all of these, we were able to get soil samples out of the seeded area in July and August, but in August we were only able to get soil samples at 2 of the row crop fields. So soil sampling again was much easier in these areas that we had established. The other thing that we will be doing next year with these 4 fields, again in a paired comparison approach, we will be taking samples for some soil health indicators as well.
All right. Well, that's what I've had for questions so far. I'll give folks just a couple other minutes as they type in their questions. In the meantime, I'll share this in the chat box, but if you attended today's field day for a CCA credit, here's your information to getting that submitted to me. That's my email there by this evening at 5 p.m. So please include your full name, the name that you entered to attend the virtual field day, especially if you use a shorter name for that or a different name, and then your number that's registered with the organization. And then promo for our next virtual field day, which will be Thursday, September 24th. They're out actually filming for this one today. It's manure application considerations during dry soil conditions. So please plan to join us then, 1 o'clock on September 24th. So I'll go back to the screen. Oops, sorry. Open up the chat again. See if anybody's put anything in there. Well, it doesn't look like I've gotten any more questions in, so I'll again share this CCA information via the chat box, so you can copy it from there. Thank you all so much for coming today. If you have any additional questions, feel free to contact me via this email here, or and I can get you in touch with either Dennis or Mark if you have additional follow-up questions. We will be hosting other field days about this project as it'll be continuing for the next couple of years. So stay tuned for updates regarding this project as we continue to learn more about what's going on in these, redefining field edge spaces. So it looks like, I was gonna say Mark froze. So